I'm Dr. Ryan Stanton, PR Chair for KACEP and past President of KACEP, also with Everyday Medicine. And today we're going to bring you the talks from the KACEP annual meeting at Churchill Downs in November 2017. The theme of the conference was Money and Medicine, talking about finances and some of the career choices you can make outside of emergency medicine. Our second talk is by Daniel Wrenne, Certified Financial Planner and founder of Wrenne Financial. He focuses his practice on physicians secondary to their unique financial situations and challenges. He talks about some of the things that are important in terms of planning your finances and priorities when it comes to your income and life as a physician.
Story of a young doctor that attempted to commit suicide and fortunately failed in his attempt. My decision to end it all was 100% work related. I had just lost a young girl in the ER a few weeks ago, influenza. I followed proper protocol, gave her a couple of treatments, and she felt better, so I discharged her home with appropriate warnings. 30 hours later, she came back in a respiratory arrest. She ended up on life support with family refusing to withdraw care. They, of course, blamed me and, of course, complained. My review was days later. While my employers were very sorry about the case and stated support for me, the result would likely lead to termination due to this incident and a few other cases that were trivial. My psychologist says it wasn't just this last girl, it was trauma after trauma after trauma. Yet I've never really been depressed per se and never suicidal. I just snapped. Sitting alone with my grief, I grabbed what I needed and drove up to the mountains. I thought my wife would be better off without me. I texted, "I'm so sorry, you deserve better. I've tried to be strong, I can't take it anymore. To have that girl die was too much. To have to face being terminated for it, I can't go on. I'm sorry, I love you to the end of the world and back. But after one final hurt, I can finally stop hurting you. You have your family and your church to help you, and you have your finances taken care of." I took a handful of pills with the final thoughts that my student loan debt would not pass on to my wife, and at least she has my life insurance to take care of her. Then came the police cars. Ultimately, I was thrown from the truck, tasered, cuffed, and put in the back of the police car. I requested to go to the hospital and was surprised that they instead took me to jail. Of the next 4 days, I have almost no memory. I'm told I went into respiratory, then cardiac arrest in jail, and they started CPR. I was finally transported to the hospital where they got a pulse back. I was critically ill and on ventilator support. My family was told I was going to die. Then my sweet daughter found what I took and the appropriate meds were given. I improved. A couple days later, I was off the vent and out of the ICU. Almost every day since that worst day, my wife just looks at me and repeats, "I can't believe it even happened." The people I've told about this are utterly shocked. I've spoken with a few residents I used to teach, and they can't believe it either. Could happen to any doctor, seemingly without warning. Nobody would have ever guessed this would happen to me. Reading these types of stories and hearing these things really concern me. It affects me personally because in our business we deal exclusively with physicians and their families and helping them make smart decisions to live their great lives. And when it's a problem for them, it's a problem for us. Now, none of our clients have had problems near that level, but we see issues with burnout in our clients regularly, and it's something that's definitely on our radar. So the questions I ask when I see those types of things are, what can we do? As financial planners, I see how money tends to tie into everything in life. It seems like whatever you do with money, it can either be good or bad. It ties into everything. And so in asking those questions, what I have come to the conclusion of is I believe that how you manage your money can have a direct impact on avoiding burnout and ultimately living a great life, which is what it's really about. So if anybody has ever been job dependent, they'll know what I'm talking about here. Job dependency is where you are completely restricted by your job. You must work 100% to pay bills. You have no options, no flexibility, no independence whatsoever. It's like being restricted by a boa constrictor with no way to move. You can barely even breathe. When you mix job dependency with burnout, it's a recipe for disaster. It's like a ticking time bomb. Eventually, it's going to blow. Financial independence, on the other hand, is where you have the flexibility to not have to work ever again. It's where you have complete independence and flexibility and control. Burnout is not even an issue whatsoever. It's off the table. So my question for you guys is, what if you were financially independent today? Would you change anything about how you work or what you put up with? Or would you be more willing to start a business on the side? Would you maybe speak up about that idea you have about improving the profession? Or personally, would you maybe take more time at home with your family? Would you travel more? I think the more financial independence, the more financially independent physicians there are, the more we can see those types of things like burnout be off the table totally. I feel like financial independence is the best tool to combat that. And so with financial independence, it's a journey, right? So you could win the lottery, but hopefully none of you all in this room are playing the lottery. It's not a good financial decision, right? It's a long journey, right? So it starts out with taking a few small steps. And so that's really what this talk is about, is those first initial steps you can start taking towards moving the direction of financial independence. And it begins with 3 fundamental rules. So the first one is let your values be your compass. Second one, take control over your money. Third one, put your money to work for you. And so let's start out with, let's clarify what values actually are. So values are those things that motivate you. They're the things that get you up in the morning, that energize you. They're the things that help you recharge away from work. They're the things that really make life good. So when your values are not in alignment with your actions or the things that you do and speak and say, the way that you behave, when those are not in alignment, you feel off and discontent. Something just doesn't feel right. But when your values and your actions are in alignment, it's like you're hitting on all cylinders. You feel good about everything. Life just feels right. And so, what are your values? If I was to ask everyone in this room what their values were, what would you say? If I had the ability to go all CSI and figure out, exactly what was going on in your world, what would I see? Would your values be in alignment with your actions, or would there be some disparity? I think that's a good question for all of us to ask themselves. And if you look at my situation personally, there's times when honestly, I have some misalignment. I don't believe I'm perfect, and the key though is about observing that and using it as a motivation to pull that back together. So what's this got to do with money? I'm sure you guys are asking. So I really love this quote. I don't know who said it, but show me your calendar and your checkbook and I'll show you what you value most. I think money has everything to do with it. So at the end of the day, like I was mentioning, money tends to tie into all these things. I have a little story I want to share about a client. It's one of my favorite examples of how this all works. I'm sure you guys have had friends go through this. Maybe you've gone through it yourself. They're transitioning into practice, okay? So, like many people in that phase, they're wanting to upgrade houses. And so, through working with me, we identify a good target price range for what they're going to buy. The price range that we pick is based on our planning process. We go through their values and what's most important to them. So they list things like travel, vacation, family, things like that. And we use those values to set their goals. So $500,000 is the goal that we establish. And so we go on our way. We got a good target. I feel good about it. It appears that they feel good about it. So I get a call a few weeks later, and they found the perfect house. Everything about it is great. And I'm excited because I'm excited for them that they found a great house. So they start explaining it. It's got this huge backyard. They can see their kids playing in it. They don't have kids yet, but they have envisioned their kids playing in it. They've even shown it to their parents, and their parents love it as well. The house is perfect. In fact, it doesn't have any flaws. And I've heard that sort of description many times from clients. It's true love. I mean, they really fall in love with this house. And it's really just an object, but they're falling in love with like the future vision of what they see the house becoming. And so, like any good financial planner, right, there's something missing here. Like what's the price? So I ask, I'm like, what are you offering? And they say, oh, don't worry, we're doing it tomorrow, but it's $1 million. And you could tell that they were procrastinating telling me the number. And so it's $1 million. We're offering tomorrow, not to worry. We talked to the mortgage broker and the realtor, and we worked through all the numbers, and we made it work. And we're willing to do what it takes to get in this house, even if that involves working more shifts or delaying paying off our student loans or savings. We're willing to make this work because we found our dream house. So do you guys think that this is a good decision or a bad decision? Terrible. Okay, I'm glad everybody here is with me on that one. See, I'm the outsider in these things. I see it from the outside. So it's pretty obvious to me that it's like a terrible decision. But I also, as a human being, and as a friend of theirs, I really want them to do the things that they want to do in life. And so, like, after hearing this, I fortunately get them to agree to a meeting. I think they're going into this meeting thinking we're going to figure it out, right? Because that's all, they're like, your job is to figure this out for us. So we're going into the meeting figuring it out. And so we sit down, have a powwow, and instead of figuring it out with them, I go back to the original plan, and I re-clarify, listen, you guys have established your values, family, travel, independence from work, paying off your student loans, things like that. If you buy this home, it's in direct conflict with what you guys told me was most important. And on top of that, if you do it, you'll be completely job dependent. If something bad happens, you're just toast. I don't think it's a good decision, ultimately, was what I told them. I think it's a terrible decision. And so as I'm saying all this, I see their facial expressions. And I feel like it's hard for me. It's like I'm telling them their new puppy's ugly or something. It starts out with disappointment and frustration, and then it turns into like almost anger. It's kind of awkward. I mean, because they're very silent. And so I don't think it's going well. I guess it really wasn't going well. And ultimately, they leave in silence. So I'm thinking in my head, because they didn't really say anything, I'm thinking there's no chance. They're for sure buying the house. Like, no chance. And so I'm never going to hear from them again. I'm walking out of that meeting, no chance. And I don't hear from them again for a while. But I get a surprise text, praise the Lord. 4 weeks later, they found another perfect house. Only this one is $550,000. So I'm like, we'll settle for the $50,000. That's totally fine. And so what had happened along the way is, I just didn't quite see it, is they had the blinders on. They were in the emotional chaos of the house decision and didn't realize they were totally deviating from their values. So we had clarified it in the non-emotional state. We had clarified those values, and it made sense. Like all of you all, obviously you don't buy the $1 million house. But in the heat of the moment of the decision, they just totally deviated. Fortunately, in the process of revisiting all that, they were able to wake up and decide maybe it's not a great decision. And so today, fast forward today, several years later, they're still in the $500,000 home, 550. They're very happy, they have a balanced life, and everything is good. So the key with that is, what do you do about it? Like, how does that relate to you? Because the trick is, it's very difficult to self-identify those types of things. So, like many of these things, you have to have these systems in place to kind of keep you on the road. Like, as an emotional human being, it's difficult, and so you really got to kind of put these systems in place that will force you down the right path. And so, if you look at the worksheets that I have passed out, the first section on there, in the value section, there's some questions that I love that are great about getting you thinking down the path of what's most important to you. And if you can take a time out and work through those with an open mind and really like identify those things that are most important to you, that's a fantastic first step. It's just putting it on paper, literally writing it down on paper is a fantastic first step. Now, once you have your goal, your values identified and clarified, the next step is to actually put them to use. So you go back, you jump in the world of craziness, you're back on the treadmill. So especially when you're in the heat of the moment of a decision, you gotta call like timeout. You gotta be like, I'm gonna call timeout. Then you gotta take like a mental break and you gotta pull the values out and you gotta ask yourself, is the decision I'm about to make in alignment with my values? And you got to really seriously think about it. As you go about setting goals in your life, that's another opportunity. You got to pull it off the shelf and revisit. What are those values? What is truly most important in my life? And along the way, build in as much accountability as you can. Like, for example, a spouse or a financial planner. But you got to utilize those things. I have clients, this happens unfortunately, but they tell me after the fact that they're like, I bought the $1 million house and it's already done. So if you're working with a person like that, or you have a spouse, have the conversation before you make the decision. So having value clarity is like having a compass to point you in the right direction. But having a compass alone doesn't really get you moving. You got to start taking steps towards that right direction. And that begins with learning to take control over your money. Taking control over your money is about getting your money to do ultimately what it's supposed to do for you. Sounds simple, right? So my question is, how do you manage your day-to-day finances? Are you a penny pincher? Do you count all your pennies? Do you budget to a T? Do you spend hours looking at your budget every month? Or do you just kind of go with the flow? Everybody's got their own system. Or do you do like this guy, you bury your head in the sand? I think everybody is guilty, including myself, from time to time, of just sticking their head in the sand with their finances. Especially in today's world of electronic everything. It's like, I don't even see money anymore. It's rare that I see money. It just does its thing. And everybody's so busy, it's so easy. But the trick is, you gotta pull your head out. So this is a money bucket. So let's think about it like this. So let's say your income is like money getting poured into the bucket, right? So if you have your head in the sand, like the dude, when you see the money start to build up, when you see water in your bucket filling up, you're gonna take the shotgun approach. So you pull out the shotgun, everybody knows how to shotgun, shoot off a bunch of pellets, and you blow out a bunch of little holes. You're like, all right, cool, got that taken care of. And you don't really worry about it, you just kind of rock on with life. But the problem is, maybe the flow out is coming out faster than the flow in. And eventually, the bucket just empties. And that's when your alarm bells go off. And what you do to solve that is you look for more money to pour in, either by working more shifts or by taking out debt. That's an incredibly stressful way to live. On the other hand, people that have control over their money, they look at the bucket and they're like, okay, it's starting to fill up. And they take the same approach, except for they punch one hole at a time. And they think very intentionally about what that extra outflow will have effect-wise on the inflow. And they understand the net impact. And on top of that, they establish a threshold where if it ever falls below the water level that they've established, they sound their alarm bells. Instead of letting it get to empty, they have like this threshold. The alarm bells go off if it ever goes below that. And when it does go below the threshold, instead of working more shifts or taking out debt, they plug holes to relieve stress. It's a totally different approach. So my question for you guys is what do we take from this? And at the end of the day, it's about being aware, I think, is having awareness for where your money's going. And so there's a really simple system I want to just walk through. And you can see in the worksheet that I've passed out, there's some expense numbers and some just different tools to document where your money's going. So this begins with figuring out from a starting point, where should your money be going? So like, what is your ideal target? And think about things like savings, taxes, giving. Those have to be the first thing you think about. So what is your ideal savings or your ideal money situation? Second thing, you gotta do kind of an audit and figure out where your money is actually going. And then if you are off at all, you have to take time, take action and start to plug some holes. But if it's in alignment, that just gives you good reassurance that you're going down the right path. So once you have good value clarity, once you have good control over your money flow, next thing comes putting your money to work. Einstein has a great quote I love: compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. So if Einstein thinks compound interest is so important, let's make sure everybody understands. So what this chart shows is an investment that grows over time and earns compound interest. Compound interest is the yellowish color that starts out minuscule and becomes massive. So what compound interest is it's basically where you begin to earn interest on your interest. It's like rolling a snowball down a hill. When you roll a snowball down a hill, it starts out small, and as it goes, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually it gets to the point where you can barely even stop it. So that's how compound interest is, except for the snowball is like money and the hill is like time. So with compound interest, time is your best friend. The sooner you start, the faster you can get to the point of getting to that end point where you have massive, huge snowball, you can't even stop it. The thing about investing that I find very interesting is the market. If anybody has read about market returns historically, they're really good. I was looking at it when I was preparing for this. I was looking at market returns for like the past 30 years ending last year, and it was like 10.5% or something along those lines, which is, that's a great rate of return. That basically is enough building to get most people where they need to go with their money. But the problem is that the average investor gets way below that. So the question I would ask is, why is the average investor just getting so far below actual market returns? And so it's really three things that are happening that I see. So just to clarify, stocks are like a sliver of an ownership of a company, right? So if you own a stock, it's like you own a sliver of a company. The market is like all the stocks that exist, right? So this chart or this picture you see is meant to represent the market. All the little dots are like stocks. So the first issue I see happening is what I call the quest to beat the market. So think about a time when you've been driving in traffic and you pull up to a stoplight, and next to you you see the guy, the aggressive driver, the classic aggressive driver. As soon as the stoplight turns green, he like slams it, screeches tires, and just takes off, zigzagging in and out of traffic, driving like a nut. All the while you just kind of stick with the flow of traffic. Now, he gets ahead for a while, and several miles pass. Eventually, you start approaching the next stoplight, and you see him again, except he's like slamming on his brakes. And sure enough, he ends up right next to you again. And you look over and you see how he's super frustrated, and rightfully so. He just wasted a ton of gas, taken all kinds of crazy risks, hadn't gotten anywhere, probably stressed out. So the crazy driver trying to beat traffic is like trying to beat the market. When you're trying to beat the market, you're trying to pick the winners, buy the winners, and sell the losers. But at the end of the day, you're typically taking more risk, spending more on expenses, and in most cases end up equal to or worse than everybody else. The second issue I see with investing is expenses. So Morningstar, everybody's probably heard of Morningstar. Morningstar is a big investment firm or whatever. Claims that the average expense ratio on a mutual fund is 1.25%. The average advisory fee is 1%. So what's that? 2.25% is if we assume the average cost of somebody that uses an advisor with an average fund. So what's 2.25%? Whatever. This chart is kind of small, is meant to show you kind of the impact of that over time. So what I've done here is taken a equal investment earning 8% for 30 years. The rate of return is 8% on this. And so in the first red category, that person pays 2% in expenses, right, over the 30 years. So they're investing $50,000 a year for 30 years, earning 8%, but they pay 2% in expenses. The second example is 8% with no expenses. And the third is the difference between the two. So the 2% over the 30 years costs just over $1.7 million, which is massive. So what is your all-in expenses on your investments? That's a really good question. Sometimes the challenge is they're very difficult and hard to figure out. But a lot of cases you got to ask the difficult questions of the people that you work with to find out, because this is really taking a bite out of people's investments. The third thing that I see eating into people's returns is taxes. So taxes are like expenses, and they're just kind of like a drag on your investments. So with taxes, it's kind of like you have all these different accounts you can invest in. You got like 401ks, IRAs, Roth IRAs, 529s, all these numbers and letters type investment accounts. So think of all the different investment accounts like suitcases. And then mutual funds are like clothes to put in the suitcase. And so the trick is that every single different type of suitcase has like a different like effect on your taxes. And so you have to be aware of the net impact of what that account is doing to your taxes. And so in a lot of cases, I see all kinds of inefficiencies in regards to the taxes that people are paying over long periods of time. So when you add up the attempt to beat the market with the expenses and the taxes, it produces a serious drag on the average investor's return. And so at the end of the day, most of our physicians that we work with, they have just a lot of stuff going on. They're busy people and they have a lot of different accounts all over the place. And what it really, I think a really good starting point in regards to taking control of your money is just having like a system to keep up with all this stuff and see how you're doing over time. And so my favorite system I think everybody should do and keep up with is to track your net worth. And so you'll also see on the stuff I passed out a template. You can find the actual spreadsheet if you want to download the actual spreadsheet or whatever. But I think it's incredibly valuable to, at minimum, track your net worth quarterly. It's kind of like your blood pressure for your money. It'll show you how you're doing. And we do this for clients every quarter. And what it will show is kind of like a track of how your life is changing over time in regards to your finances. So let's recap. Rule number 1 is you got to let your values be your compass. Rule number 2 is you got to take control over your money. Rule number 3, you got to put your money to work. At the end of the day, this stuff is not so easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. So everybody's heard an apple a day, what? Keeps the doctor away. So an apple a day keeps the doctor away. If that's true, why doesn't everybody eat an apple a day? Because it's so easy not to eat an apple a day, right? It's so much easier to eat the candy bar. Maybe a candy bar every day. But you got to be smarter than that. You got to think about the consequences of that. It's over a lifetime. Eating a candy bar a day over a lifetime, we're talking disaster. And so you got to really think about what are the impacts of my decisions, the little small ones today, long term. And you got to have the discipline to take that first step in the right direction. And that begins with starting to take control over your money, like we talked about, and ultimately it begins with taking that first step. And so the tricky thing about money is everybody's so different. And so everybody's first step will look different, but the most important thing is you're taking those first steps. And you're eating the apple a day. You make the decision intentionally to start eating that apple a day today. And before you know it, you're moving that right direction and you're building towards a great life with balance and independence and flexibility, and you're living the life that you always envisioned. So I appreciate you guys having me today. Ryan, you need me to hand over the clicker to you?
Yeah. Anybody have any?
Are we doing it? I don't know if we're doing Q&A, but.
Yeah, we got any questions? Did you plug in? Okay. Anybody have any questions? I've got a quick one. It's one that we've asked is, what are some of the big mistakes you see physicians making from a financial standpoint?
Buying too much house.
Go ahead.
We've already talked about that though. Really the 3 that I talked about are big, but aside from that, more specifically, screwing up their student loans, like mistakes on student loans are a big one for the younger physicians we deal with. Not refinancing. If you have student loans and you're paying anything 4% or higher, you should be refinancing unless you're going for public service loan forgiveness. So I run into people that haven't refinanced and they really need to. Not having any equity in their home for long periods of time, that's a big mistake. buying a house instantly in the transition into practice in a new area, a new town, new everything, that's just a big time risk and mistake, I think. And I think taking advice from the wrong people, like a buddy with an investment idea, or an advisor. There's lots of advisors that are not working in the best interest of clients. So those are the biggest.
What about retirement?
Go ahead.
She was asked about retirement. Do you have some general formula, some way of figuring out when do you have enough?
Yeah, my favorite way of doing it is super simple. So you look at your total balance and you take 4%. And if 4%, so let's say you have $1 million. What's 4% of $1 million? 40 grand, right? So if you have $1 million and you need 40 to live in retirement, you're good. That's based on a 4% withdrawal rate, which a lot of the experts say is fine to live for the long haul. So that's when I would call somebody financially independent or able to retire, is when their balance of all their retirement assets and investments, you add all that up together and 4% of it is adequate, then they're in good shape.
And that's, I mean, if you're going to preserve capital and planning to get something.
Yeah, and you could beat that up a little bit if you actually want to spend down on the capital. But 4% is
You got to plan on what you're doing. Kids are free out of 18.
Put it all in pork bellies and gold. Is that your advice?
That's exactly right.
Do you see the loan forgiveness, service forgiveness program? It's a 10-year program, right? Is the longevity of that going to be? So if you advise new grads now that if they go into that, I mean, you're hoping that it sticks around for 10 years. But do you see the longevity of that persisting? Because there has been talk of getting rid of that program.
Yeah, I've had that. That's probably the most frequent question we get speaking to groups. And I think the answer is that the program itself will go away. But for the individual, I feel comfortable with the individual that's already signed their promissory note on their loans being okay. Because part of it, my confidence is that, like, when we look at the actual promissory notes, it has language about public service loan forgiveness. So you've essentially signed a contract with the lender, the government, saying that you're going to be in that program is going to be available. So I would be shocked out of my mind if they took it away from people that had already taken out loans. But I'll also be shocked if they keep it for people for new borrowers, because it's on the chopping block already.
Yeah. All right.
To a quiet place, and in the silence you will show me who you are.